She sat alone on her throne every night, with silver light from the stars shining through the tall windows. Her long black robe flowed over the cold floor. Her face was hard like stone, and no one ever saw her cry. They said she was the strongest queen. In the galaxy, they said her words could command fire from the sky and freeze oceans with fear. They said she had no heart and no soul, only power and cold silence. But late at night, when no one was near, the queen let her shoulders fall, and her sharp eyes softened, her lips trembled, and her hands clenched the edge of her seat as if holding on to something that might vanish. She cried in secret with no sound, no voice, just quiet tears that ran down her sharp alien face and disappeared before anyone could see. The guards never turned around. They were trained to look forward, always, even when they heard soft breaths and a sound like broken glass in the dark. She believed no one knew, but someone did. A human man sat in a dark cell not far from her chamber. He had been caught in battle, taken as a prisoner of war. He should have been executed like the others. But something strange happened when he looked up into the eyes of the queen during the trial. He did not scream. He did not beg. He simply looked at her as if seeing more than a ruler, more than a monster, and she paused just for 1 second before giving the order to spare him. Now, he sat in a quiet place with metal walls and no windows, but each night he heard a soft sound through the vents, a sound too delicate to be machines, too soft to be soldiers. He closed his eyes and listened. It was crying, not wild or loud, but full of pain. The kind of pain that grows slowly over years, like a storm that never ends. He did not know where it came from at first, but one night the sound grew closer and clearer. He leaned near the vent and whispered, "Who are you?" Crying stopped for a moment, then came back softer than before. The next morning, the queen did not sit on her throne. She walked slowly through her garden of crystal trees alone. Her guards followed far behind her face, as calm as always, her steps silent. She passed by the cell where the human stayed and paused just for a second. She looked through the window and saw him standing. Not afraid, not angry, just waiting. Their eyes met. She turned away without a word, but something in her chest twisted like a string being pulled from deep inside. The next night, the crying came again, but this time it was louder. The man sat up in his cell and leaned closer to the wall, his hand pressed gently against the metal. "You don't have to cry alone," he whispered again. Silence. Then, "Leave me," came a voice, cold, but shaken like wind trapped in a cage. "You're not made to cry," he said. "You are made to feel." No answer. The queen stood just outside his door. She had come quietly with no cards, no crown, only her breath and her shaking fingers. Listened to the human's voice, and for the first time in many years she did not feel like a queen. She felt like something else, something soft and breakable. The next day she ordered his cell to be moved closer to the main chamber. Her advisors asked why, but she gave no answer, only a sharp look that stopped all questions that night. The crying did not come, but in the deep silence the queen walked to the edge of the chamber, where the man now stayed behind thick glass and heavy doors. He sat on his floor reading an old human book made of paper. The guards had let him keep it after her order. She stood there watching him, then said quietly, "Why do you look at me like that?" "Like what?" he asked. "Like, I am not your enemy," she said, "because maybe you are not." Queen said nothing. She turned away and walked into the shadows, her robe trailing behind like black smoke, but her heart beat louder than before. The human stayed silent, watching the place where she had stood, a strange thought growing in his mind. The queen cries. She rules the stars, commands armies, destroys worlds, and she cries. He did not know why, but something inside him wanted to reach out, not in hate or fear, but in something else. The queen lay in her chamber that night with her eyes open and the stars outside blinking like tiny fires. She did not cry that night, but her fingers remembered the sound of his voice, and her mind replayed his words again and again. "You are not made to cry. You are made to feel." For the first time in her long, cold life, she wondered, was it true? Could a queen cry and still rule? Could she feel and still be feared? And why did it matter that a human had seen her tears? She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come, only the echo of his voice in the quiet. And the memory of being seen, truly seen, asterisk. The guards opened the heavy door, and light poured into the quiet room. The human blinked as the tall shadows moved toward him, their armor shining with sharp edges, their faces hidden behind silver masks. stood slowly, hands behind his back, no fear in his eyes, only questions. The guard said nothing, only stepped aside as the queen herself entered the room. She wore a long robe, the color of storm clouds, her eyes sharp like blades. Her voice silent, but full of command. She walked forward until they were only a few steps apart. The air was thick. No one moved, no one spoke. Then she said one word. Why? The human looked at her and did not kneel. His body stayed tall, his face calm. Why? What? He asked. Why? Did you speak to me that night? She said, her voice low like thunder far away because someone was crying. He replied, I am not someone. I am your queen. I am the ruler of this galaxy and destroyer of your world. She said, maybe, but you were still crying. He answered. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons, ready to strike, but the queen raised one hand and they stopped. You stopped. You saw what you were not meant to see. She said, her words sharp, her face unreadable. I did not see a ruler. I saw a person. He said, no. One speaks to me like this. No one dares to look at me like that. She said, maybe that is the problem, he answered. The queen stared at him, her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Her eyes searched his face for something she could not name, something that felt too strange to be weakness. He should have begged or shaken in fear. He should have dropped to his knees and asked for his life, but he just stood there calm and steady like a rock in a wild river. Turned around and said quietly, follow me. The guard stepped back, unsure what to do, but she did not look at them, and so they followed as the human walked behind her down the long silver halls. Past rooms filled with glowing maps and voices from 100 worlds. They walked in silence. Finally, they reached a quiet room with soft lights and no weapons, only seats and a window. That showed the stars, she said. And he did. Why did you spare me? He asked. I do not know, she replied. Maybe. I saw something in your eyes that made me pause, maybe. I was tired of always giving the same order. The human leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. You are not where I thought you would be, he said. And what did you think I would be? She asked. Cold, hard, empty, and now sad. Alone, maybe even lost. The queen looked away. Her fingers touched the edge of the table, like she wanted to grip something real, something solid. Do not think this makes us friends, she said. But I don't think you want another enemy either. You humans are strange, she whispered. And you aliens are not as different as we were told, he replied. They sat in silence for a while, neither speaking, just watching the stars drift slowly past the window. Then the queen asked, do you miss your world? Yes. Every day, he said. And your people, they are gone, he said quietly. Her eyes softened. Just for a second, I lost people too, she said. Then we are not so different, he said. She stood and turned away, her voice suddenly colder. This changes nothing. Do not think kindness will save you. I don't want to be saved, he said. I want to understand. She froze her back still to him. What? Why? A queen cries alone in the dark. Her hand tightened into a fist, but she said nothing. Next morning, the palace buzzed with whispers. The human had been taken from his cell. The queen had met with him in private. No one knew what had happened. But the guards looked nervous and the advisors grew restless. She returned to her throne that day and said nothing, her face calm again, her crown resting like ice on her head, but her eyes kept drifting toward the door, as if expecting someone to walk. And later that night, she stood by the window in her chamber. The stars cold and far and endless. She did not cry, but her thoughts were loud. No one had spoken to her like that in 100 years. No one had looked at her like she was something more than a title. She had given orders to crush planets and silence cities, but one human with no weapon and no power had broken through her armor with only his voice. She did not know what to do with that truth, and the chamber below the human sat on a new bed. No longer locked in a cold, dark cell. The walls were still metal, but the air felt less heavy. He remembered the look in her eyes. Not fear, not hate, something else. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew this. The queen heard him, and she did not turn away. The palace was never quiet. Not truly. Whispers moved faster than light through the halls, bouncing from wall to wall, from guard to guard, from servant to servant. No one said the queen had changed, but everyone felt it. She no longer stayed silent during the daily reports. Her voice now softer, less sharp. Her gaze not always distant. Sometimes it drifted toward the main hall, where the human now walked freely under guard, but not in chains. He was given food, not scraps, not punishment meals. He was allowed outside in the garden, under close watch, of course, but still allowed. And the alien nobles noticed. They watched him with narrow eyes and tight lips. Why does she allow it? One of them asked quietly. He must be useful, another answered, or dangerous, a third. Whispered maybe he found a secret. Maybe he holds something over her. One. Alien General slammed his cup down during the meeting. The table shook. But the Queen said nothing. She only glanced at him once, and the room fell silent again. Your Majesty, the General said this cannot continue. What cannot continue? She asked, her voice calm like still water. Human walks freely in our palace. Our people speak of it in fear. Our soldiers question it in private, he said. Has he caused harm? She asked. No, but he replied. Then what are you afraid of? She said. The general had no answer, only silence. That night, the Queen stood at the edge of the garden, watching the stars. Again, the wind moved her robe like black water, her hands behind, her back, her mind full of noise. The human stepped into the garden quietly. He did not speak. He simply walked beside her, a respectful distance between them, but not far. They stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Do they hate me for this? She asked softly. Some do, he answered. And I do not hate me. He said, why? Because I think I see you, not just your crown, not your power. You, she turned to him slowly, her face hard to read, but her voice shook a little. You are the first who has ever said that. He looked at her, and for a moment he saw something behind the sharp lines and strong armor. He saw sadness, not weakness, not failure, but something. Really do not want your people to suffer, he said. They already do, she replied. Then why not stop the war? Because to stop it means to admit. I was wrong, she said. Maybe it is not weakness to change. Maybe it is courage, he said. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in deep thought inside. The palace, the whispers grew louder. She speaks to him in private. She walks with him at night. She listens to his words. Some said she had lost her mind. Others said the human had powers. Some even said he had poisoned her thoughts, but no one dared say it aloud. The Queen sat in the high chamber. The next morning, her eyes moving slowly across the room as her court delivered news from across the empire. A city on the edge of the system had rebelled, small but growing. A fleet had vanished near a human colony, and her people were afraid of weakness, afraid of change. The Queen raised her hand, and all voices stopped. Bring him here, she said. The guards moved quickly, and soon the human stood before her, the room filled with stares and silent. Judgment speak, she said. He looked at the court and saw fear and confusion. He looked at her and saw strength. Hidden under pain, I am not your enemy, he said. Some laughed, others scoffed, but the Queen raised her hand and silence returned. Continued, I was born on a broken world full of war and loss. We were told your people were monsters that you would destroy everything, and we believed it. We fought, we killed. But then I came here and saw something else. I saw sorrow. I saw Queen who cries when no one watches. And I ask you all now, does that make her weak? Or does that make her strong? The room fell silent. Again, the Queen stood slowly, her eyes moving over every face. Enough. Human was led away, but not as a prisoner now, as something else, something harder to name. Later, in the quiet of her chamber, she sat alone again, her fingers brushing the edge of the table, her mind still echoing his words. She did not know what she felt, but it was heavy like a storm waiting to break. The stars outside blinked as if listening, and the whispers in the court did not stop, but now they carried new words like trust words, like peace, and some even dared to say hope. Asterisk. The grand hall shimmered with light as alien nobles gathered from every corner of the empire. Their robes flowed like rivers, their jewels caught the stars, and their shining music filled the air, strange and slow, with sounds from 10 different worlds. The Queen entered, lost her presence, alone enough to silence the room. Her robe was dark purple, her crown carved from the bones of a fallen beast, her eyes calm but distant, her steps silent. As snow by her side walked the human, not in chains, not in armor, just simple clothes and steady eyes. The court stared but said nothing, their minds boiling with questions they dared not speak tonight. It was meant to be a show of unity, a reminder that the Queen was still strong, still in control. The feast stretched across silver tables, food from burning moons and frozen stars offered in shining bowls, and glowing glass servants moved like shadows, carrying dishes, pouring strange wine into tall cups. The Queen nodded once, and the music returned, but softer now, like it feared something. The human sat at her left side, a place once held by generals and kings. He said little, but watched everything. His eyes caught every glance, every whisper, every hand that twitched too fast or too slow. He noticed one servant move oddly. His hand trembled as he poured the queen's wine. His eyes darted, then dropped. He vanished before anyone else noticed. Queen raised her cup slowly, her fingers brushing. The rim her lips parted just enough for a sip, but the human's hand reached out and stopped her. He said the court gasped. No one touched the queen. No one dared interrupt her, not even her highest commander. She looked at him, eyebrows raised. He leaned close and whispered low. That servant, his hand shook the cup. Smells different, she said nothing, just looked at the cup. Then at the guard near the wall, a nod so small, it was almost invisible. Guard moved fast, caught the servant by the arm, pulled him to the center of the room. The queen stood slowly, her voice cold as ice. You brought me poison, she said. Servant shook his head. His lips moved fast, but the words were fear, not truth kissed. As she ordered another servant step forward, dipped a silver needle into the wine, waited a moment, then gasped as the needle burned black and snapped. The court erupted in noise. Some shouted. Some stepped back, some stared at the human like he had summoned this moment with his very breath. The queen raised her hand and silence returned. The traitor was dragged away, screaming his fate sealed with chains and fire. She turned to the human, her voice softer. Now you saved my life again. He looked at her and said, I only did what was right. The queen nodded. Slowly, her fingers still shaking as they held the cup, she placed it down and looked out over the crowd. Let this be a lesson, she said, not all who walk beside. You wish you well, not all enemies wear different faces. Some wear smiles and pour your wine. Her eyes moved across the hall, and many looked away, afraid to meet her gaze. That night the feast ended early. The halls emptied faster than usual. Guards doubled their watch, and no servant moved without being watched in. Her private chamber, the queen sat near the window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of sweet herb steam curling into the cold air. Human stood nearby, not speaking, just watching the stars like her. Why? Do they hate you? He asked quietly. Because I change, she said. Or because you are changing, he said. She looked at him, her eyes tired but not weak. They say, I am soft now that I listen too much, that I let a human live when I should have crushed you, like the others. You. Stilken, he said, but I will not, she answered. Why not? Because when I look at you, I do not see a threat. I see a mirror, yes. You came from war, pain, and fear, so did I. You lost your people, so did I. We were both raised to fight and told to never feel. And yet, here, he sat across from her, the air warm between them, but heavy with truth. Do you want peace? He asked. Yes, more than anything, she whispered. Then maybe it starts with a hand, not a sword, she did not answer right away. Her eyes dropped to her hands, the same hands that had signed death across the stars, and yet now shook after almost drinking one cup. You held my hand once when I could not breathe, she said. I would again, he replied. The silence that followed, not cold, not sharp. It was soft like snow falling on stone, outside the stars. Blinked, the palace slept, and in the quiet chamber, two hearts that once belonged to war sat just a little closer than before. The morning air was gentle as soft winds moved through the high garden of the palace. The sky was a deep shade of blue with 3 suns rising slowly across the horizon, light passing through crystal leaves and dancing on the ground below. The queen walked quietly along the stone path, her steps slow, her hands behind her back, her robe trailing like mist. The guards watched from afar, but did not follow her into the garden. This was her private space, her quiet place. She paused near the edge of a tall fountain shaped like a beast. Long forgotten water trickled from its mouth into a smooth glowing pool, the sound peaceful, steady, like a heartbeat that never stopped. She turned slightly as she heard footsteps. The human had entered the garden without a word and stood near the flowers on the other side of the path. He was not afraid. He never was, not with her, not anymore. He picked one of the strange flowers. It shimmered with soft green light, its petals folding and opening like tiny wings. He turned and held it out toward her. For you, he said. She looked at the flower, then at him, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she took it slowly, her fingers brushing against his. What does it mean? She asked. On my world, we give flowers to show peace or respect, or sometimes something more. She held the flower carefully, as if it might break. It is beautiful, she said. He smiled gently and said, so is this place even in the middle of a war? You built a garden? You made something soft in a world full of sharp things. She looked away for a moment, her eyes watching the light move across the stones when I was young. I came here to hide from the voices, from the battles, from the weight of the crown. She said this was my only safe place. You brought me here. Why? Because I wanted to remember that peace is real, that it can grow even when the world burns, she said. They walked together along the path. The human spoke of his world of green hills and blue oceans, of the rain that danced on rooftops and the smell of food cooked in small homes. He painted pictures with his voice, and the queen listened for. While she forgot who she was, she forgot the crown, the throne, the army. She forgot the cold eyes of her council and the weight of being feared. She asked questions not as a ruler, but as someone curious, and he answered with honesty and warmth. They reached a quiet corner of the garden where the trees bent over a small bench. They sat in silence for a while, watching the suns rise higher into the sky. Tell me something, she said, something not from war, not from loss. He thought for a moment, then began to sing softly. It was a song from his childhood, a tune about stars and dreams and quiet nights, his voice low and a little rough but full of memory. The queen tilted her head, listening, her eyes half closed, her hands resting in her lap with the flower still glowing softly between her fingers. When he finished, she said nothing for a moment, then something happened that had not happened in a very long time. She smiled. It was small and quiet and quick, but it was real. Her lips curved, her eyes softened, her face opened like a window that had been locked for years. The guard standing at the edge of the garden saw it and looked at each other in silence. No one had seen the queen smile, not the generals, not the council, not even her closest allies, not since the early days, not since before the first war. Humans saw it too and smiled back, not because she smiled, but because he could see that it mattered to her, that she had allowed herself even for a second to feel light. That was beautiful, she said. Here, smile or the song, he asked. She looked at him and the smile grew just a little. Both, she said. The suns rose higher, the air warmed. The flowers opened wide and the garden seemed to breathe with them. The queen stood and looked at the world beyond the garden walls. Do you think they will ever accept this? She asked. Some will not, but change always starts with one step. He said. She looked down at the flower in her hand. Then let this be the first step. That evening the queen walked through the palace with a different air, her eyes still sharp but no longer distant, her voice still strong but now warm beneath the command. She gave small kindnesses without speaking of them. She paused to listen, when before she only ordered. She looked at her people and saw them not just as subjects but as souls. The human watched from afar, knowing something had begun, something small, like a seed in deep soil, and in the place where no one had ever seen it before. The queen had smiled. Asterisk. The night was silent in the palace. All's not the usual silence of discipline, but a deeper one, thick like fog, heavy like waiting something unseen moved through the air like a shadow hunting its own name. The queen stood in the chamber of memory, tall walls lined with old symbols, old weapons, old victories. She walked slowly between them, her fingers brushing the edges of the past. She was alone or so. She thought. Her guards were posted outside the doors, standing stiff as statues. Her mind was full of questions, full of fire that did not burn, but whispered behind her. The sound came quiet and sharp, the breath of someone trying not to breathe, the footstep of someone trying not to be heard. She turned slightly, but not fast enough. Blade came from the dark silver and thin, aimed for her back with the hunger of betrayal, but it never reached Tira. Body moved between her and the blade. The human stepped into the attack without thinking, his arm catching the blade, his voice shouting her name, not with command, not with fear, but with something else. Blade sank into his shoulder, blood dark and fast flowed from the wound. He gritted his teeth and pushed the attacker back. Guards stormed in too late, but ready. The traitor was caught, his face revealed in the torchlight, and the queen froze. It was her most trusted advisor, the one who had stood at her side during every war, every loss, every silence, the one who had held her crown when she could not. Why, she asked, her voice low, but shaking. You have changed, the advisor said. You have grown weak, soft. You listen to a human. You smile, you speak of peace. This is not the queen we followed. This is not the queen we need. The guards dragged him away, but his words stayed behind like poison in the earth. Queen turned to the human who now sat on the ground, breathing heavy, his hand pressed to the wound, blood still dripping between his fingers. Knelt beside him. For the first time her knees touched the cold floor. Her hands reached for his face, and her voice cracked. Why? Did you do that? Why did you take the blade? Because I saw it coming, he said with a weak smile. That is not a reason to dine. But it is a reason to actually call the healers. They rushed in with lights and tools and strange whispers. They worked fast and quiet. The queen never left his side, not even when they asked her to. She watched his face, watched every breath like it was the last, and something inside her twisted with fear, not fear of loss, but fear of feeling. When they finished, they said he would live, but he needed rest. The queen ordered a new chamber to be prepared near her own, guarded by soldiers loyal to her. Only that night she stood on her balcony alone, the stars blinking like broken promises, the wind cool against her skin, her eyes fixed on nothing. He had saved her life again, and now her own people had turned against her. The next morning the court gathered in silence, the hall colder than ever. The queen entered, not with music, not with guards, only her own steps and her own voice. She looked at every face and said one word: betrayal. The word echoed off the walls like thunder in a canyon. No one moved, no one spoke. She told them what had happened, who had done it, what it meant. She told them of the human who had bled to protect her. Some faces showed shock, others showed shame. But one or two showed something else, something she remembered too. Well, fear not of war, not of enemies, but of change. She did not speak of punishment. She only said, old ways are ending, and if that frightens you, then perhaps you should ask. Why then she left the hall, her steps slow but strong, the silence behind her louder than any answer. She returned to the chamber, where the human lay resting, his face pale but calm, his eyes closed, but moving gently under the lids as if dreaming. She sat beside him and for a long time said nothing. Her hand rested near his, not touching, not yet, but close. He opened his eyes slowly and saw her and smiled weakly. Still here, he said. Still here, she answered. You could have let me die, but I did not. Why? Because I did not want to lose the only one who sees me. They said no more after that, just sat there together in the quiet light of the chamber. Outside the palace, the world kept spinning. The stars kept burning, the ships kept flying, but inside one room, inside one heart, something had changed. The queen no longer cried in secret now. She watched over the one who had stepped into the fire for her, and for the first time she did not feel alone. The morning was quiet in the palace, not because of fear, not because of silence, but because something had shifted like a storm that had passed and left the air clean and new. The halls no longer echoed with doubt, but with wonder. The queen walked slowly through the healing chamber, her steps soft, her robe flowing like a calm river, her eyes searching for the face she had been waiting to see awake again. The human lay still, his chest rising and falling. Gently his eyes closed, his skin pale but warm. The wound had been deep, but the healers had worked with care and skill. She stood beside him and waited, not as a ruler, not as a warrior, but as someone who did not want to be alone again, someone who had found a reason to stay. Minutes passed like hours, then his fingers moved, his breath deepened, and his eyes opened, slow and tired, but full of life. He blinked, saw her, and smiled weakly. You waited, he said. Yes, I did. She replied, I was not sure you would. I was not sure either, she said, beside the bed, her hands resting in her lap. Then, without a word, she reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time she had ever done that, not in battle, not in duty, but in feeling. Her fingers were cold at first, but then warmed as his hand closed around hers. The silence between them was deep but gentle, like the space between stars holding something too big to name. You're not like I thought a queen would be, he said, and you're not like I thought a human would be, she answered. Do you regret saving Mayno? I do not. Do you regret stepping in front of the blade? No, I would do it again. They looked at each other and saw the truth in their words. No lies, no fear. Just the strange understanding that had grown between them like a flame that refused to die. Outside the chamber, the palace guards stood in new positions. Their armor still shining, but their eyes different, more alert, more aware, more human. The advisors no longer spoke in cold commands. They now moved with caution and curiosity. The human had survived, the queen had changed, and the empire felt it in its bones. Whispers of peace had turned into questions of hope. What if the war could end? What if the queen could lead with more than power? What if one human hand in hers meant something more than alliance? That evening, the queen called for a message to be sent across the stars. A message not of threat, not of surrender, but of something no one expected. She spoke to both sides in one voice. We have lost too much. We have bled. and burned and broken our worlds in the name of fear, I offer now not a weapon, but a chance, a hand instead of a sword. Message reach every world, every station, every commander who had once sworn to destroy. The enemy now hearing a new call from the highest voice in the galaxy. Some rejected it, some doubted it, but some listened, and those who listened began to wondering the palace garden. The queen walked again with the human, this time slower, this time side by side, not as ruler and prisoner, but as something harder to name. The flowers were in bloom again, glowing in the dusk, the wind soft, the stars above blinking like silent watchers. You really believe peace is possible? He asked. Yes, he said, not everywhere, not all at once, but here now. It begins, and us we begin too, she said. They stopped near the same bench from before, the same place where she had smiled for the first time now. She smiled again, but not small, not hidden this time, full and bright and open. He reached out and she took his hand again and held it tightly. For all her power, all her strength, all her fearsome legend, this moment was the one that made her feel real. She had faced death, betrayal, loneliness, and war, but now she faced something stronger than all of them: connection across. The star stories began to change. They no longer said the queen was made of stone. They no longer called humans only enemies. They spoke of a ruler who cried in secret until a human saw her tears and did not look away. They spoke of a man who walked into fire for someone not of his kind and held her hand when she needed it most. And they said, maybe, just maybe, this is how peace begins, not with a treaty, not with a fleet, but with two hands held together in the quiet.